Welcome to SoulPod Studio. We're not your average social network. We're a community of professionals, enthusiasts, and students taking sustainability to the next level. Join us on our journey and get inspired by Earth heroes just like you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of SoulPod Studio. I am joined today with a dear friend and past colleague, Lesia Nünlist. Lesia is the co-founder of Zurich Helps Ukraine, a nonprofit organization based in Zurich, Switzerland, dedicated to supporting refugees who fled Ukraine. Lesia and fellow volunteers have worked tirelessly this past year to help more than 6,000 refugees. We are so grateful for you, Lesia, and to hear your inspiring story, one of determination and compassion for others.
Hi, Casey. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Lesia. For our first question today, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and why you decided to launch Zurich Helps Ukraine in support of the Ukrainian refugees?
So actually, I think I should start with saying that I'm Russian. I was born and raised in Russia, in Ural. There is actually a town called Pervouralsk. It's 3,000 kilometers from Moscow, so it's not central Russia. And 10 years ago, I moved out from Russia. I was 21. So actually, all my growing up life, like my professional outside of Russia, I've been living and studying in the US. I've done master's degree in Germany. And then for the last 8 years, I'm here in Switzerland, Zurich. So I remember that day when the war began. It was 24th of February. And I felt completely lost and broken because as a Russian, I really felt certain amount of guilt, even though that I'm not in the country anymore. And I just had a strong urge to do something. So on 27th of February, 3 days later, I actually opened up a social media channel, which was called Zurich Helps Ukraine. And that evolved into this nonprofit association, a registered association that helped to so many people and involved so many people as well. But at the point of the time, I really had no clue where it's going to lead me to, how it's going to be. It's just like I felt if there is something that I can do for one person, I would love to do that. And I think from the beginning, the motto of mine and then became also motto of the association is that you can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone.
I absolutely love that motto from the very beginning, Lesia, and I was so inspired by you, just going right into action, thinking about how you can help support these people. And it was really admirable. And I know that you spent a lot of your free time outside of work hours to the organization. Can you walk us through all of the different activities you're involved in leading? How many volunteers were involved? And how did you really run the operation so effectively for Zurich Helps Ukraine?
I think the first 6 weeks, I got very little sleep and no free time or no off time. So yeah, actually, I do have a full-time job. So it was very challenging to still do the full-time job and the charity. But I think it's that adrenaline that just kept going and kept me going. So in the beginning, as I said, everything was and is based on social media. I work in communications in social media specifically. And I do believe that social media can be a very effective channel to reach out to certain amount of people when they need something. So I opened up a Telegram channel. It's the Russian-based platform, Telegram, where a lot of Ukrainian people or Russian-speaking people are using it. And originally, that channel was to coordinate and spread the message about what people of Zurich can bring to a certain point of the nations. Because we were sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. I think there were a lot of people involved coming back, and a lot of politics kind of. But I think originally we sent around 30 tons of aid to Ukraine. And then because you need to keep the transparency, it's not very straightforward where the aid is going, who's going to be driving there. There are so many things. And I have noticed that actually refugees from Ukraine are fleeing from Ukraine, and the first ones are already in Zurich. And I remember it was beginning of March last year, and you start seeing these women who flee the country with their 2 kids and the backpack. Why backpack? Because, you're literally fleeing from your home. As I'm talking, I'm having the goosebumps. And you need to walk a lot. Like you need to literally walk to cross the border of the countries, and you cannot take a lot. So basically, it's still kind of winter. It's still cold. You're coming to a country where you cannot use your money. You don't speak the language, and you have kids with you. So it's really that people need something. So we start organizing different pop-up locations where Zurich people, local people, could bring all kinds of donations. And people were asking, so like, what kind of donations do you need? And I'm like, well, imagine if your wife, sister, or daughter was to flee the country with one backpack, what would you want her to have? It's simple as it can be pads, it can be toothpastes, shampoos, underwear, socks. It's very, very simple things that were needed. So back then, I already had my dear colleague from University of Zurich and a friend who is Ukrainian and also a mother of two. She actually decided to help me. So we're still together, two co-founders running this charity. And we just started like doing all these different pop-ups where, yeah, as I said, people can, for several days, people were bringing items. We would be sorting them out. And then on one day, we were giving them away. So like I said, there are two co-founders, but nevertheless, I think it's very important to highlight that without volunteers, without people who were coming to help us for free without expecting anything, the whole year would not have worked out. We kicked off with it was really, really spontaneous things. So I knew nothing about charity. I knew nothing how to organize things. It was just being spontaneous and trying to make things work. So in the beginning, we had just local people coming and helping. We had hundreds of refugees coming to all different pop-ups. I remember that I think the biggest pop-up that we had was next to Zurich Engem, and we had 692 people there. And that's also the situation where such high number of people are coming and actually don't know if you will have enough food, enough hygiene products, or enough clothes for them. So at some point, my colleague Oksana, co-founder, she started doing an electronic sign-up because you need to maintain the level of people who can come and level of donations that we have, because sometimes the level of donations would not match the demand. I remember once we were partnering with a company called English First, or actually their employees. It's not really the company that helped us, but rather employees. And I remember that morning when people came through, and we didn't have a lot of donations that day. And I think they were left 200 people on the street, queuing on the street massively. And then I had to go and tell them, guys, I'm sorry, there is nothing else that we can give you. Everything was gone. And you can imagine the frustration of these people, that they were queuing for 2 hours. They were very upset, and there was nothing that I could have done. We started doing the electronic sign-up, where we have the registration link with a bit of the data involved. Of course, we have the disclaimer and GDPR because of the data protection. But that helped us to maintain the level of actually people coming through. We have properly, so what we're doing now, or what we have been doing now, you always can register. We have a slot for registration, usually for 1 hour, because on the channel, on social media channel that we have now, we have more than 8,000 people. And you can imagine that we will never be able to give at the same time enough help to more than 1,000 people. So our further donations were always limited to 300 people at once. And then we were checking, for example, if you already received the help last month, probably you would be excluded from the donations this month, because we wanted to increase the reach and help to as many people as was possible. We were also doing special donation months. For example, my colleague Oksana, she did in last June, a special month for mothers-to-be. As you can imagine, it's quite expensive, especially when they were getting some money here, but it's not enough to get everything what is needed. And then what I was doing the same month, as I have my little animal with me living, I know how expensive it can be as well having an animal here in Switzerland. And I was always fascinated by the fact that people were fleeing with their animals. I've seen rabbits, I've seen turtles, of course, cats and dogs. So I had a special donation month exactly for people, or actually their animals. So I think answering your questions on the activities, the main activities were communications on social media channel, and then organizing all this donation and giveaways. At the moment, we actually have a quite good group of volunteers. It's a group of 20 people, normally at each giveaway, you would need at least 10 people because you always need to coordinate, you always need to help. And these volunteers have to speak either Ukrainian or Russian because in the end, English is not the language that every refugee can speak. So our group of volunteers is mostly Russian-speaking volunteers, and they're not getting anything. We are giving them food, of course, like when we are doing the giveaway. It's like basically the whole day that we are spending in this activity. You need to get some food. We also have some refugees who are volunteering for us. And actually, I have a very close friend of mine. Well, she became a very close friend of mine, but she was originally a refugee who came to help and support us. And she's just an amazing human being. So, for example, when the refugees are helping us out, what we also do, we also pay their transportation. So, 20 people, giveaways, and communications, if that answers your question.
This is absolutely incredible, Lesia. And the amount of refugees that you're able to support over this past year, I mean, it's really mind-boggling. And I think that you cannot even imagine as an outsider, how this really touches you. And the fact that you just went right into action, getting all your volunteers, into place. I mean, creating this resource for over 8,000 people, your online resource that you have. I just think that's amazing. And how would you say that you really reached out to the local community, the local Zurich community, to help support your efforts? I know you did a lot of the pop-up events. Were there other partners? Were there other organizations that you worked with to get these pop-ups going? How did you really kind of reach out and collaborate across the Zurich community?
So actually, it's funny because I would say that we have not reached out very actively. It was actually people or some companies reaching out to us and saying like, look, we can give you a location, or we can provide you something like that, or we can send you 6,000 toothbrushes. That was also the thing. So I think in the beginning, when the war just began, there were a lot of companies and people who wanted to be engaged. And I think at the moment we were the only organization that was doing something because the government was overwhelmed. The government wasn't prepared to help. And then we were here. We were super responsive. Everything was either on social media, on personal phones, or emails. And a lot of people did reach out by themselves. And I'm very grateful that we were able to collaborate with them. And also as a nonprofit, we are not getting any money. We are not monetizing anything. So it's like purely just the efforts of real people, a few companies. I think in the beginning, when we were trying to reach out to the city, as I said, the city was too overwhelmed. Later on, I remember already like September, October, the city wrote me and saying like, oh, by the way, we have this roundtable discussion on support on refugees, blah, blah, blah. It's tomorrow at 2:00. Can you come? And I'm like, well, sorry, I still have a full-time job. Like, I really cannot do that on such a short notice and talk about this when I still have the full-time job. So I think, we did not reach out to anyone, but I'm really, really grateful that people were coming to us. And I would say that actually majority of people who came through to help, they were either Russian-speaking or they were involved, somehow connected with the Russian-speaking community. For example, the wife is Russian and the guy is coming to help. Or those were the people who fled the war themselves like 20, 30 years ago. Because later on, you were able to see that actually the amount of help has reduced significantly. Like people who helped in March and April, they were like, well, why would we help in June or July? So in the end, I would say that majority of people who were donating and supporting, it was the same crowd that stayed with us through the whole part. And there were a lot of Russian people who were involved to help.
I think that the ability, your ability to rally these people and to get them to do something, it really does mean so much. And I'm sure that all of the Ukrainians that you've helped, all of the families, I'm sure they're, forever grateful for the work that you and the organization has done. And Lesia, could you share maybe one of your proudest moments from this past year? Was there a specific person or a specific family that Zurich Helps Ukraine really, you helped them and this story stood out to you? I'm sure you've seen so many, and I'm sure so many people have touched your lives, but is there one that you could maybe shed light on?
Yeah, I think the number of people that went through my heart last year, it was really high. And I've seen the people, I've seen their faces, I've heard their stories, I've met them. I think there are two stories that really come to my head as we speak. The first one, when we did the first giveaway, it was 13th of March in Erlenbach. It's a little village next to Zurich. And before we were just gathering our items, like all the donations, on one evening, a girl came, like 25 years old girl. She was apparently traveling in Iceland when the war began, and then she was not able to come back to home, to Ukraine, and then she had only her backpack and nothing else. And she was the first refugee I have seen myself. It was already a late evening, I think 8 o'clock, was dark, and she came and she looked so lost. And I looked at her eyes and I just wanted to cry. And normally I'm not the person who cries, like as a Russian, I don't cry. But yeah, and then I remember 6 months later, she wrote saying like, actually, well, I do know Lesia. I have seen her. I know how she helps. And I was like, oh my God, because that was the first refugee I met. I wrote about her because I have also my personal blog where I used to write about my thoughts and my emotions regarding the situation. So yeah, I wrote about her, and then 6 months later she came and she shared her side, and that made me cry. Then the first actual giveaway in this Erlenbach, we had 300 people coming. And first, I didn't know if people would be coming because like it was just the beginning of the whole situation, of the whole migration. Erlenbach is outside of Zurich. So normally you would not even go there. And imagine as a refugee, you don't know the language, you don't know how to get there, and still 300 people came. And as I said earlier, I don't cry. But that day, like at some point, I had to run away and I burst in tears because that's just such an experience. And seeing all these people and at least feeling like, oh my God, at least this tiny little thing that I could help with, that really warms me up. And then there was also, besides that, I've been volunteering on the main station in Zurich, where in the beginning, a lot of refugees were coming. And once again, they spent a lot of hours in the train or in the buses or walking. So they also need some help here. And there was a family, mother, father, and 2 kids. The way how the father escaped is because when the war began on 24th of February, they just drove immediately. So that was the part where he, as the man, actually was lucky to get outside of the country. And I totally get it because they have 2 kids, 2 and 3 years old. And we are still in contact with this family. And I remember I walked them the whole day through the city, supported them with everything. Later on, I actually invited them to my place for dinner. So we had because it's also the connection, it's also the people connection that you really need. And we had a very nice dinner together, and we are still in contact. And so I would say these 3 stories, they are still in my head outside of all these other people and faces and kids. It's just something that really has changed my life a lot, and it will never go away from my heart.
I love hearing those stories. Thank you so much for sharing. And they are so heartfelt. And you're bringing tears to my eyes too. And I'm, like I said before, I'm sure that they are all just so grateful for you stepping in and for getting all this support for the people who really needed it most. And this leads me into my next question, Lesia. What really influenced you to learn more about sustainability and really to incorporate it into your professional and personal life? What you've done today or what you're doing today, it really does touch on sustainability in so many ways. So how would you say your overarching knowledge, how did you really incorporate that into your life?
That's a very good question. So I think back in the days, I was not thinking about sustainability at all. This term really didn't exist in Russia back in the days, but I always felt the urge to do something to help someone. So that all began with the animal support. I had 2 rescue cats and 1 rescue dog. And then I was always thinking, okay, now I'm in Switzerland and Zurich, I earn my money, I have a proper career, but then does it help the world? Is there anything that I can make better? I mean, of course, I'm not going to change the world completely, but I really feel like I felt the urge of doing something good. So I work in a bank, and I think in a bank, it's not very straightforward, or at least it was not very straightforward what you can do better in order to be more sustainable. And back in the days, like 2019, I was involved with the sustainability investment team in the previous company. And I had my interest there. And I was like, okay, so there at least you can really work with passion and you can kind of combine how you feel about the world with what you do. So that led me to reassessment of my career in general. And I decided actually I need to gain more knowledge about sustainability. As I said, back in the days, 2019, that term was just erasing. So it was not really, now you can see it everywhere. Everyone is talking about ESG, about commitments, blah, blah, blah. But back then, I think it wasn't there. So I wanted just to know more. I wanted to learn more also how finance can be really sustainable. And I was lucky enough to find a course here at the University of Zurich, which was called Sustainable Finance. And my previous employer supported me in doing the course. And then 2020, also when the COVID started, I was lucky enough to do the course there. And I think that helped me kind of if not to shift completely my career, but at least take it from a different angle and see it from a different angle, things that I'm doing.
That's amazing. So this was your Certificate of Advanced Studies at the University of Zurich in Sustainable Finance, correct, Lesia?
Yes, that's correct.
And would you recommend this certification or something similar to others who are interested in sustainable finance? Would you say that this would be a good course for those who are really kind of, let's say, at the beginner stage in sustainable finance, or should they be already practitioners in the field?
I think in general nowadays you have so much information out there, so you don't even need the course. You can do education yourself. When I started, it was not the case, and it also helped me to get to know people. And that was actually the point where I met Oksana, my co-founder of the charity organization. So we studied together, we did the workshops together, and I knew how reliable she was. So I think that was cool. But nowadays, I think if you're a beginner, do that. If you're already a practitioner, I don't think that's going to be any value of you, specifically this course. But like I said, there's so much out there online, also remotely, that, you don't need to limit yourself only to one course.
That's great. Thank you, Lesia. And are there any other resources? Do you investigate any other free resources around sustainability education, for example, on EDX or Coursera or any of the other online platforms? Have you tried any of those?
I haven't done more because later on I was too busy with some personal things in my life and then the charity, which I think in the end gave me way more knowledge and expertise than any online course. So I had to learn it myself. But like you said, Coursera for sure, it's one of the good platforms. There is also Cambridge Sustainable course, Oxford. So basically every decent university nowadays has these courses. You just need to Google them. And then obviously the price varies. But like I said, you don't need to pay a lot. There are a lot of free resources out there.
What I like what you mentioned, doing one of these type of certificate courses, maybe that are in person, you will have that opportunity to network and to meet others and to maybe form new relationships with people like the one that you did with Oksana. So I think that's a great idea and great inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Lesia, I would love to ask you a personal question. I know that you love hanging out with your friends, exploring Zurich. Can you share some of your go-to eco-friendly stores, maybe restaurants to check out in Zurich?
So on the stores, actually, I'm not here to help. I'm ordering everything online. I hate shopping, but there is a quite big thing in Zurich which called Brocchi House. It's like the second-hand store, and it's everywhere. Like basically every village you're going to find that. So that's the place to go. And as for the restaurants, I would always recommend going out to Hiltl. Hiltl. So Hiltl is the first vegetarian restaurant that was opened in Europe. I think it was the middle or end of 19th century. They have like the huge restaurant, which is everything plant-based, or they have a very little thingy, not too far away from Hiltl, where actually I still used to go there quite often with you when you were living here in Zurich. It's a mix between the flower shop and the restaurant. So it's beautiful. It's gorgeous with all these green flowers and things. And then you can also eat out. So that's would be my place to go. Yeah.
Oh, how I miss Hiltl and their delicious baked goods. I think they were gluten-free too, or vegan desserts, but they are delicious. And just like a little paradise with all those flowers in there and the delicious plant-based food. Definitely missed that restaurant and enjoying a good coffee with you in there, Lesia. And we know that you are one of the biggest animal advocates and supporters out there. Can you tell us a bit about your story and the great lengths that you went to in order to rescue Lemmy from Russia?
Yeah, so I always joke that as a child, I always wanted to have a dog, but my parents gave me a brother. So I grew up and I got myself a dog finally. But yeah, I always want to have an animal. And my first cat, I bought her, and she was a fabulous, beautiful, she is still, but she doesn't live with me, cat. I was young. But then as I grew older, I understood that you don't buy friends. Animals are your friends, and you just don't buy your friends. And I do believe in adopt and shop. So there were two other cases where traveling to Greece, I ended up bringing two cats from Santorini. One is still living with my neighbor, and another is living with my ex-partner. So the cats are at his place. And 2 years ago, when the COVID was here in Zurich, when we were doing remote work, and I was already spending some money for the local charities in Russia that support animals, because situation with animals in Russia or such countries, it's completely horrible. Like, it's awful. And I was supporting a few dogs. I'm still supporting them. And there was this situation where a shelter in Russia closed up, and they just kept all animals in cages outside. So imagine, first of all, these poor animals were living in the cage of, 2 meters long. They would never go outside. They would sleep, they would pee, they would poo, they would eat at this place. And then they just closed the shelter and left all these dogs outside in these cages. And it's -30, once again, in Russia. So a few volunteers, girls, of course, you will be surprised, or not be surprised, but mostly are women doing that. They drove in one day 100 kilometers, and they opened up some cages, and I think they saved around 50 dogs, 50, out of 500. And Lumi was one of them. And back then, me and my ex-partner, I was like, look, it's the time to get the dog. We have stable careers. We can do remote work. We can afford having another animal. And in Switzerland, it's quite cool. You don't have stray animals, stray dogs for sure. And you need to be in line. Like, you are literally queuing to get adoption, like to get to have a dog to be adopted. And I was thinking, if we're going to do it from some different country, you literally save the animal. So we saw Lumi on Instagram after she was rescued. It took me 40 days to get all the paperwork done, her vaccination, the passport, because she was still in Moscow. I had to organize the flight. It wasn't also very straightforward. And then we went by plane for 3 days. We got her, and now it's me and her living our best lives. And she's the most beautiful animal. She's the kindest one, but she's just like so cuddly, and she has so much love in her eyes. So yeah, you don't buy friends. You just, you get them, you rescue them.
She's beautiful, and her story is so sweet, and it's just so nice that you were able to do that for her and go to the great lengths that you went to. So I'm sure she will be forever grateful to her pup mommy.
Thank you.
And Lesia, in our last few minutes together, I wanted to touch upon the fact that the war is still sadly going on. And for SoulPod's members and our community who would like to get involved and who would like to help support the Ukrainian refugees, what would be the best way that they could help or get involved?
Well, I think a lot of people are trying to reach out to organizations like ICRC or other charity organizations, like, okay, I'm going to donate you money and please do something. That works, okay? But I think there's always some little thing that you can do it yourself. You can, do a mentoring maybe for a young refugee, or helping with the resumes, CVs, applications. So just find what you're good at and what kind of knowledge you can share with the person. And I'm sure around you, I don't know how it's the situation is in States, but in Europe, you're going to find a lot of refugees around here. And I would say not only Ukrainian refugees, right? It's not the wars are in the world happening. It's not only Ukraine and Russia. So just find something that you're good at and think how you can share this knowledge with someone who could benefit from that. And on another note, I would say that there are no bad nations, there are bad governments and politicians, and also try not to spread the hate against other nations that where the governments were involved in this war, because I feel like there are a lot of people, also Russians, who escaped the country, who had to go in prison, who were tortured, or who cannot live their normal lives anymore, and who also have broken hearts and broken families. So just I think the key point is keep your heart open for everyone, regardless of the nation and nationality.
I love that. And put your strengths to use where you have those, great characteristics like you, Lesia. You are so great at getting people together, and you're so great at collaborating and ensuring that you're moving things forward. So use the strengths that you have to help support, whether it's Ukrainian refugees or other refugees or anything else that you're, want to help support, any other, volunteer activities. Use your strengths to help propel that. So I like that advice. That's great. And my last question for you today, which we like to ask all of our Earth heroes, if you had one sustainability superpower, what would it be?
It's such a good question. Like, so many ideas come to my head. It's all about animals and people's rights and women's rights. But I think there is something basic that everyone would need is the accessible water, clean water. So if I were take a liter of dirty, damaged water and make it drinkable, that would be my superpower.
That's great. I mean, water is key, right? And without clean drinking water, none of us would be alive today. So I think that's an amazing superpower. And I love that one. Lesia, thank you so much for being here today, for stepping us through all the efforts that Zurich helps Ukraine, what you have achieved and what you've done for the refugees. And thank you for just being you and for always caring about others. We appreciate it so much. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Cassie, for having me. It was my pleasure sharing the story, and I hope it's been helpful for someone.
I think it will be. Thank you again. Have a great day.
SoulPod Studio is made possible by listeners like you. Join the free SoulPods platform to become a part of our virtual community of changemakers. Links to our social media, website, and platform can be found below in the show notes. If you enjoyed the show, feel free to rate and review our podcast. Thank you for listening and for your support.